Ian. Good day to you, my friend. How are you?
Hey, I'm great, Nique. Great to see you.
You know what I want to talk about, Ian? It's that time of year. I want to talk about college admissions because
Yes.
things have gone haywire, and you and I need to dissect it.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, so we're going to talk about all aspects of college. Let's talk whether or not it's even necessary. But as you
Correct.
say, there's some interesting new criteria that some schools are focused on.
Well, I love it. And you and I have talked about uatx out of Austin, which is a relatively new university, and they announced, I want to say last week, a new process for admitting students. And what I'd like to do is have you and I and our audience watch a brief 1-minute video that they released April 4th.
Great.
And I even want to stop it at various points, Ian, for you and I to kind of riff on some of the things that the University of Austin is saying.
Yes.
All right, let's go to the video. So the first thing that comes up, no extracurriculars. I have a funny story, Ian, from my kids. A few years ago, there was a student in their school whose parents created an athletic event in Asia, flew their kids to Asia to participate in this fake athletic event so that they could get a gold medal and put that on their application. Like, I get where University of Austin is coming from. It's become such a game. Who knows what's real and what isn't?
Well, right. This is the whole idea. If we're trying to, if that's the meritocracy, the problem is all of these criteria are gameable. Someone can manipulate it. I mean, that's crazy. And it's also unethical. But if this degree becomes so coveted at the right school, you can see parents leading to this kind of behavior.
100%. Let's keep going with the video. No personal essays. I mean, stating the obvious, right? You and I, we made a wrong career decision because we should have set up one of these essay writing businesses and retired as hundreds of millionaires, each of us, because it's a multi-billion-dollar business, writing these essays for kids. And now we introduce AI to it. Whose voice is really being captured in these essays?
That's the thing. Who knows? Who knows? And yeah, I always wonder about that. If X number of kids are applying to Harvard, I guess you've got to funnel your information in to make it unique. And then one of these heavy language model AI vehicles will spit out an essay, and hopefully it's unique to you. I'm waiting for the day when literally two kids apply and they both have the same AI generated essay. But your point is
100%.
another, yeah. And even before AI, yeah, you're right. Your dad, your mom, your uncle, someone stepped in to edit your essay.
You talk about merit based. It's think of the disadvantages that these sorts of things have for young people that don't come from a resourced family. It's absolutely unfair. And the University of Austin has said, forget it, we're done with it. Let's keep going with the video. No personality scores, no nepotism. We'll stop it again there. Nepotism, right? So the athletes have no advantage. Oh, you've got 4 generations of men that have gone to this school. It's irrelevant.
And presumably, superficial characteristics like race and gender aren't, are sort of count within that same umbrella category.
That's right.
I mean, yeah, I get it. I understand exactly what it is that they're seeking to accomplish.
We'll let the video run through now, just so the audience can.
Future now, man.
So this is fascinating, isn't it? Right? Here's totally transparent. Here's the score you have to get on the SAT. Here's the score you have to get on the ACT. And then this new test, Ian, CLT. What's that about?
Yeah, so even that, I really love the way that UATX is thinking because, so first of all, the point they're making is that standardized tests, they might be imperfect, but they're certainly less imperfect than these other gameable attributes like a personal essay, or the nepotistic relationships. But even within the standardized test category, you have a duopoly, right? You've got SAT and ACT. So there is something called the classic learning test, and that's been released just over the last few years. And it's really a new empowering alternative that has a very unique aspect of it. The word classic is important because if you take this test, the readings include, things like Sophocles, Homer, Epictetus, so in order to prepare for that test, you will have had to most likely been educated in a classical school, and there's an explosion in the number of classical schools around the country. But I love the fact that UATX is basically saying, look, these are our three objective criteria between the SAT, ACT, and now this new test, the classical learning test or classic learning test, CLT. I think it's great. I think it's wonderful, and it's just clear. Now, I'm sure there are people in the audience will say, well, look, you can game those as well, right? You can't, I mean, kids with more resources can get the test tutor. That is true. That is true. But, I'm in New York. I went to Brooklyn Tech where we had to take the specialized high school exam, the SHSAT, and I knew a lot of kids who worked for many years knowing that that was going to be the test that they'd have to take to get into high school. And so they got the books, they got the tests from prior years. And when I went to Brooklyn Tech, it was a very racially and socioeconomically mixed school
Wow.
environment in terms of population.
Now, Ian, please tell me I'm wrong, but are they trying to get rid of that test in New York City?
Yeah, the former mayor, Bill de Blasio, some other progressive leaders. I mean, this is the problem, because they're unhappy with typically the racial makeup of who's getting in. And it is a fact. I think in years past, Stuyvesant High School, which is one of the best high schools in New York, one of the specialized high schools, I think had maybe single digits number of Black kids get into the school, right? And rather than say, why are there so few Black kids getting into Stuyvesant and passing the exam? In the view of these people, the culprit is the exam itself, right? Let's just get rid of the exam. That's the problem. It's the exam that's inherently racist, right? Inherently biased, right? But not to mention the elimination of all the what's called IG or special progress classes that had existed in elementary and middle schools that had been eliminated. Or how about the lack of school choice? I mean, I run a school in a district in which only 7% of kids graduate from high school ready for college, right?
Wow.
And there's a cap on charter schools, right? So rather than try to address these issues upstream, some of these elected officials say, let's just get rid of the exam. And that's the exact wrong-headed move. And, and that's, I think, why UATX, this is such a big deal. They're planting a flag and saying, look, if you stand for merit, nothing is perfect. But if you stand for merit, we're going to take the most objective measure we can, which is these standardized tests, SAT, ACT, and CLT. And I think most people would agree, even if you don't like standardized tests, there's enough of a body of evidence that SAT performance does reliably predict college performance, at least in the first year, right? So I think it's a good move. Until someone comes up with something better, I think this is a move in the right direction.
Great. Let's finish the video. We got another 30 seconds just for the audience and ourselves, see if there's anything else we want to comment on. Intellect over identity. Boy, they are hammering it, aren't they? Excellence
Well,
over equity.
I mean, this is a logical pushback to what has been happening over the last few years, right? I mean, it's a backlash to the Harvard case, it's a backlash to race-based affirmative action, where there was lots of evidence that equity as these folks define it, was prioritized over excellence. Where talented kids, by the way, of all backgrounds, were sacrificed um, for kids who had different um, credentials. And what's interesting is there's this mismatch theory where you do all this effort to get kids into certain schools because that may make the demographic closer, the makeup closer to what you want, but then you're putting kids in situations where they're not prepared for that school.
Right.
I remember when I went to Cornell, unfortunately, I was in the engineering school. A number of my black male classmates, I had some black male classmates that were able to do quite well, and so it's not that's the only criteria, but there were a couple that certainly didn't belong there. In the same way, by the way, I'm sure there were white male classmates that didn't belong there either, and they had some special preference because of legacy or some other reason. And so
Yes.
this idea of getting closer to meritocracy as the primary vehicle of getting in, I think is a good thing.
What do we got? 10 seconds left on the video. Let's give uatx their full. Yeah, it's very exciting because the other thing that's, I'd say, exciting about it is the use of it as a tool to drive applications and interest. One of the things that, because I've got kids that are in that college range now, one in college, and I just can't believe how much these schools put these kids through from an admission standpoint. There's restricted early action, early decision one, early decision two. All of these things are done simply to optimize yield for the school. And as a result, put kids through the ringer 4 or 5 times because it's literally almost an arbitrage exercise of, well, if I do restricted early action here and I don't get in, what do I do for early decision? I mean, it's a ridiculous exercise that frankly is un-American and,
How
and
do
really
they
unhealthy for our kids.
how do they even market it? So you as a parent, what is the college saying to you? Like what's their rationale for setting up these levels?
There's literally no conversation about it. I'm amazed that there hasn't been like an expose on this. Like, I'm going to find out who started this. 'Cause I think when
Mm.
you and I were applying to schools,
We all
the
found out on the same day. Remember, we weren't watching computers. We got home and there was either a very thin letter, right, or a big packet. And you're like, oh yes, yes. Yeah, things have
yeah.
changed.
So things have, but they don't say anything. What they do is after the child has sort of applied restricted early action, or if they're applying ED2, it'll say your child has applied ED2, which means if she gets in, she has to go. Like they literally lock the kids in. Also, they don't even give them choice. It's
Wow.
incredibly unhealthy.
And so what if you change your mind?
I think there's legal issues. It's that bad.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, like
I
if you
mean,
get a full scholarship from some other school, and this school wants $100,000 a year in tuition, room, and board, well, you applied ED1 and you signed a waiver that committed you to our class. It's no one talks about it.
yeah. I mean, and the thing is, this is the point of the conversation. We also just have to ask the question, is it all necessary? You know? I mean,
Yeah.
Burning Glass Institute did a study they released it last year in 2024. They evaluated like 10 million different like career paths and college students, and they found that nearly half of all college graduates 10 years out of school were in jobs that did not require a college degree,
It's
right?
it's 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 a powerful it's a powerful question. You know, Peter Thiel, right? What is it? The Thiel Scholars leave school and do a startup, and I'll fund, you know, some portion of that. And he doesn't have a lack of people that are like, fine, I'm done with school.
Yeah, and what's interesting, you know, because again, I run a high school, and we do have a structure where at the end of sophomore year, students can choose the International Baccalaureate Diploma pathway or the International Baccalaureate Careers pathway, right? And in the careers pathway, and it's of equal stature, you know, still rigorous and all that, but you can choose biomedical science, computer science, early childhood development. And the idea is that at the end of your junior and senior year, you can have a credential that would allow you to get a job, you know, right
Wow.
into industry if you so wanted, if you so choose. And I think the point there is that we've got to break this mindset where college has to be the only immediate option coming
Yes.
out of high school, right? There's actually some really great research, particularly for low income Black men, that if they exit high school with a credential, they work for a few years, and then if they go back to college, much higher rates of college completion,
Wow.
much lower rates of non marital births, much lower interaction with the criminal justice system, right? Much more engaged in civic activity, right? And
Yeah.
so you start to think, huh, right, why do we have this massive predisposition that college as the thing? I mean, it could be the perfect thing for some kids, but this idea that, you know, parents are creating competitions in Asia for their kids because they're so obsessed that that's the only way that they think their kid is going to be successful.
Well, and I want to ask another question of you and myself. Who are these schools letting in? You know, as we look at what occurred at Columbia,
Oh yeah.
damaging school property, intimidating other students, burning American flags. At Harvard, taking down the American flag and putting up the Palestinian flag. I have to be brutally honest. What kind of kids are they accepting?
Yeah, it's well, yeah, what kind of kids are they accepting, and or what kind of kids are they molding,
Mm.
right? Because, you know, I mean, I do believe that the issue of sort of rigidity in thought, like college students who seem to have difficulty handling divergent opinion or competing ideas and wanting to shut that down or you know lock up buildings and um, I don't think that issue originates in college. I think it actually originates in secondary school and high school in the sense of our kids actually operating in environments where they're forced to deal with divergent opinion or competing ideas or having to actually construct evidence to make their arguments. You know, um, we're going to be doing an event at our school at Vertex Partnership Academies with Peter Boghossian, who has this process called it's a Spectrum Street epistemology, where it's a process where you're giving a certain number of claims. You know, should race be a factor in college admissions? Should men be able to enter women's sports? And the kids have to take a range of, you know, definitely agree, somewhat agree, or definitely disagree. And they have a series of statements of how they provide evidence for their arguments and was that compelling, not compelling. And so we're going to be doing that as an experiment to see if that something we should incorporate into our overall curriculum or overall practice. But you know, how frequently are even high school kids forced into an environment where they're forced to handle divergent opinion in this way? And then you're right. It's like our schools, our colleges, even screening for that in some way,
Yeah,
right?
100%.
Maybe they're making an assumption that if you do well on the SAT, ACT, the CLT, um, the classic learning test, they're making an assumption that intellect, IQ, um, hopefully means that you are better able to handle divergent opinion.
Yeah, it's a great call. I used to be an interviewer for Harvard College, and as you were talking, I remember a young lady that I was interviewing, of course, quite talented. She had gotten to the interview stage, and I asked her a question. This is maybe 4 years ago, but it was at a time Kanye West had made a comment that slavery was voluntary, and so I asked her what she thought about that specific statement. Kind of an awkward and tough question, but I wanted to see how she responded to that kind of a question, how she thought about it. Was she emotional? And her answer was okay. But to your point, though, I think those kind of discussions, it's really very few things should be off limits. Very, very few things.
Well, yeah, I mean, off limits as well as whatever it is, you have the ability to listen, discern, find evidence, make informed claims. Like these are very important life skills that
Yes.
again, not enough high schools, in my view, are doing a good enough job. And then when you get to college, these schools, you're in kind of a petri dish where you're supposed to think in a certain way, right? I mean, imagine if you were a student at Harvard or anyone or Columbia, and everyone around you is, now wearing these garbs, they're chanting a certain way. If you don't have the strength of will, right, or the intellect to think for yourself, you're going to conform.
Yeah, if you're not Coleman Hughes at Columbia, you're going to fold. I don't know that there are 100 Coleman Hugheses at Columbia or any of these other so-called elite institutions. You're absolutely right.
So
I
called.
really, I really value your point about that. Where are these students coming from? Why are they accepting them? This began long before they decided to break a window and lock themselves inside a room and not allow other students to get an education. It occurred long before they got to Columbia.
Well, no, that is the point, because if you get to a set of circumstances where you feel the only way to make your point is to exert force, right? I went to Cornell, not many years after, Willard Straight Hall was shut down. There was violence. Um, and, uh, and I mean, yes, young people are inherently rebellious, I guess you can say, but it does indicate a certain lack of confidence in your arguments. If you feel
Yeah.
the only way to resolve a situation is through some kind of physical um, violence, and that should just not be on the table.
Well, to your point, I don't know if you've seen some of the video of the administration going at Columbia, the administration going to the students and attempting to negotiate. Like these
Weak,
young people haven't taken even negotiations 101. Like they
right?
say no before the person has even completed what they're offering them. It's a
Right. Well, and also a lot of these administrators seem to have given the keys to the kids.
yeah.
You know, they don't assert their own authority, and then they suffer the consequences. And like, well, what did you think? Sometimes there, even in a classroom, there is a role for authority. There is a role that I'm the teacher, I'm the one in possession of the knowledge and the wisdom. That doesn't mean you as a student don't have the opportunity to give feedback, but there is a hierarchical relationship in the classroom. And sometimes I think these university presidents just kind of give their power away in the hopes of somehow being a friend, to the students, right? And it's the exact wrong lesson to be imparting to students.
As you know, I teach at a couple of business schools, and in one of my classes, there's a strict grading curve. And every year I get a review from someone who says, this professor doesn't understand the syllabus. He gave me a grade that was totally inappropriate. It's on a curve. And I think back to when you and I were at business school. And if I thought I deserved a certain grade, I didn't go to the professor after the fact. I kind of talked to other students. Hey, what did you do with
All
this?
right,
How,
just
I,
right.
I didn't think my
But let me
grades here,
ask
but
you a
there
question
was
though.
no thought
Why
of
a curve?
me.
What's that? Well, let me ask you. Let me ask you a question. Why a
No,
curve? Why a curve?
it's so this is the administration. It wasn't my. I didn't ask for the curve. Certain classes in the MBA program are required classes, and they make those required classes. They put it on a curve, and I was talking to another faculty member last week, in fact, and he was saying that some professors aren't applying the curve. So it's even worse when professors actually do what they're supposed to do, because then the students are like, well, my friend took the same class and there was no curve in that class. So it's why a
Well, no,
curve?
but what's interesting is even the idea of a curve suggests that you're forcing the outcomes, right? Like you could have a class where more than half of the kids, fail without, but if it's on a curve, right, then some
That's true.
artificial percent are higher, right? Because it's all relative
That's
grading
true.
versus absolute. Actually, that's wonderful. I wonder if UATX will address that issue, whether or not for the kids that do get in, is everyone measured against an absolute scale as opposed to these curves, which actually just create artificial relative results.
Yes. Yes. Well said, educator. Well said. Yeah, I'll ask. I'll actually instead of just being the robot, I'll actually ask some senior faculty. Hey, why is there a curve in this class? I'll let you know offline what they say.
Yeah, I'm curious because, you know, if a kid scores, you know, I don't know, if a kid does really well and there are kids that are, not doing as well, and it's kind of their relative scores are mushed together because of this curve. Like, who is that helping? Like, it feels like the curve is more for the school and not the student in terms of giving them an accurate reflection of their ability to demonstrate their knowledge.
Well, you and I need to keep a close eye on this, and especially University of Austin and the groundbreaking work that they're attempting to do. It's very exciting. I hear from most of the people sitting on the sidelines, they say it's not going to work because of this reason and that reason and this and funding and this, but I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure it's
Oh
not
no,
going to
I,
work.
I think I think I think well, and again, they have the beauty of being a single school in a sea of different schools. So they're quite, I think with a high degree of confidence, they will be able to attract some very strong
Yes.
students who meet their
Yeah.
standardized test criteria. No, I think
Yeah.
UATX is getting a lot right. I mean, somewhat related. They've had a lot of issues with how other colleges and universities have tackled the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so about a month ago, UATX released their DEI statement.
I saw it.
Yeah, and it's the Declaration of Independence. It's brilliant.
That is brilliant.
It is brilliant. I just think, you know, um, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when you're faced with a movement that you disagree with is that you could either just kind of reject it out of hand or ignore it, or you could say, you know what, I'm going to take your underlying premise of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm going to give back to you. I'm going to regurgitate to you how what is the correct interpretation of that concept. We
Powerful.
hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. It's very powerful. So yeah, so UATX I think is trying to think about um, old problems with new ideas or new solutions, or maybe actually they're going back. Actually, maybe that's incorrect. Maybe it's new problems with old solutions,
Classic solutions.
right? Such as merit, such as objective measures. What's most ironic about things like the SAT, ACT, those types of tests were created to combat subjective
Right.
discrimination, right? So yeah, so
Right.
maybe it's not new, it's old solutions being applied to new problems.
Great conversation, Ian. Always a pleasure to connect with you.
Yeah, as
I will,
always.
I will see you next week.
See you next week. And for those listeners who'd like to see this and other episodes of The Invisible Men, just go to www.invisible.men. And we're on podcasts all over the place. So until next time.